Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
The reason I wrote it now is because the administration has had an increasingly hostile posture towards desperate people trying to enter the country. I had been posting my opinions on Facebook for the past year or two, but various members of the family, as well as myself, thought I could no longer have a, how should we say, a quiet voice on the subject in light of the incarceration of all these children. This was an act of inexcusable cruelty.
The situation at the border over the last several months.
Not just at the border, but as the children were incarcerated and have been held captive, and whose parents, in many cases, have been sent away separate from their children. Had any other country done this at a time of war, it would have been considered a war crime.
You say you're not close to Stephen Miller. He's your nephew, but you haven't spoken to him really in 10 years. And before that, you say you didn't even know him well. Yet, you are his uncle. And for you, was it hard to come to the point to go so public with criticism like this?
Of course. It's, I write this more in sadness than in anger. I've spent my life trying to help people. I've been working in clinical neuroscience for my entire career. I've spent my life trying to help diagnose people and help them get well. I have not been interested in having public notoriety. I've been interested in having my private life and taking care of those things which are important to me. But as I say, I felt it was incumbent upon me to raise my voice, to let people know that this is a country of immigrants, and our family were immigrants. In fact, we were refugees. If my ancestors had not immigrated to the United States when they did, if they'd waited a few more years till 1924, the door would have been shut. My parents would have gone up the crematoria chimney. I wouldn't have been born, my sister wouldn't have been born, and certainly Stephen would never have existed.
So that is Stephen Miller, the white supremacist, the zero tolerance author, the Muslim ban author, the Law and Order dude, right? That's his uncle, Stephen Glosser, who felt compelled to write an essay about how hypocritical and disgusting his own nephew is with this Law and Order zero tolerance policy. And I am juxtaposing that Law and Order policy to the policy to let corporate criminals get away with corporate criminality. Everything from ripping you off with home loans and fees and debt and payday loans and your seriousness, the whole thing, everything that the Consumer Protection Bureau that Elizabeth Warren worked so hard to get set up, the Dodd-Frank law that Democrats worked really hard to get passed to separate investment banking from savings and loan. All this junk debt is being piled up again. They passed a tax scam that was just unbelievable. Most of the benefits going to corporate America, most of the benefits going to the top 1/10%, putting it on our tab, charging us the $1.3 trillion. Wages not only are they're less than flat, they're declining. So all this corporate savings, all this corporate, tax boon, all this, lowering of the corporate tax burden is depleting the revenue, right? It's depleting the treasury, and the debt is piling up, and we have to pay for it. And yet it's almost the same amount. I mean, the debt is going to reach $1 trillion, and the amount of stock buybacks is about $1 trillion. Coincidence? I think not. And so what you have here is a country of working class people of all colors, of all races, of all creeds, of all stripes, who are suffering in quiet desperation behind this giant con, and they don't know what to do. They don't know. And so when someone steps up to the microphone and tells them who to blame for their lot in life, and deflects the blame from themselves who caused it. They literally caused it. The Republican policies of the last 20-something years have caused, number one, a decline in union membership. Number two, a decline in tax revenue with their tax cuts, and more tax cuts. Number three, a massive recession that was a depression for a lot of people in 2008. The whole system collapsed. The people who got hurt the most were middle-class white working people and middle-class black homeowners who had been told their houses were worth much more than they really were by fraudulent appraisals, who were then encouraged to borrow against the difference, who did so. And then when the whole thing came crashing down because Wall Street was running a scam, they blamed you. They said you were the greedy one. You were the one that borrowed all this money. Did you really think that your $250,000 house was worth $400,000? Did you really? Well, how stupid do you have to? This is what they do. And they steal everything while they're doing it. And now they're stealing not just the treasury and redistributing it back to themselves again, but they're stealing the air and they're stealing clean water. They're abusing every privilege that they have by virtue of their offices, their positions of power. Now, a lot of people don't correlate this to, the Heritage Foundation. They don't get, what Grover Norquist had to do with it. They don't get what the, what the National Association of Manufacturers has to do. They don't get what the NRA has. Let me tell you something. They are organized. Business is organized. They have everything from the Chamber of Commerce that lobbies every day to the Koch brothers that actually write the legislation in these times, like I said, the National Association of this and the National Association of that. If it's an association, it's a lobby shop, okay? And if it's a lobby shop, then they are organized. Meanwhile, you have workers who have been told not to organize, incentivized not to organize. You have people that are working for a living that used to be able to organize in their workplace, and now you've got Republican legislatures and Republican governors, and through the last 20 years, passing right-to-work legislation, which is exactly the opposite of what it sounds like. It means you don't have to pay union dues and you could still work in a union shop. It means you can get the benefits of union, but you don't have to have union. And you don't have to it's just so sick. And if you look at the decline in union membership over these last 20 years, you will see a decline in wages that corresponds exactly to it. You will also see that working class people have switched parties. They used to, if they were union members, vote for Democrats because the union would educate them on which party was fighting for their issues, like pensions and health care and 40-hour work weeks and no child labor and all these things. And they switched over to the Republican Party. And how did that happen? This is a perfect article. I love this article because this was written by a woman who lives, and it was published in the New York Times, but it was by a woman who lives in Wichita, Kansas. And she wrote an opinion piece, an op-ed, and the New York Times published it. And it has to do with the white working class and what she sees and how she understands it. And this is important for everyone to know. She said, is the white working class an angry, backward monolith? 90 million white Americans without college degrees, all standing around in factories and fields, thumping their dirty hands with baseball bats. You might think so after 2 years of media fixation on this version of the aggrieved laborer, male, Caucasian, conservative, racist, sexist. But this account does white supremacy a great service in several ways. It ignores workers of color, along with humane, progressive white workers. It allows college-educated white liberals to single superior virtue while denying the sins of their own place in class. It conceals well-informed, formally educated white conservatives from middle-class suburbia to the highest ranks of influence who voted for Donald Trump in legions. The trouble begins with language. Elite pundits regularly misuse working class as shorthand for right-wing white guys wearing tool belts. My father is a white man and a lifelong construction worker who labors alongside immigrants and people of color on job sites across the Midwest and the South, working for a Kansas-based general contractor owned by a woman. Most struggling whites I know live lives of quiet desperation, mad at their white bosses, not carrying around resentment of their coworkers or neighbors of color. My dad's previous 3 bosses were all white men he loathed for abuses of privilege and people. It's an unfair power that my father despises. The last rant I heard from him was not about race or immigration. It was about the royal wedding, the spectacle that made him sick. He'd say, "What's so special about the royals?" He told me from a cheap motel after work. Quote, "But they'll get the best health care, the best education, the best food. Meanwhile, I'm in Marion, Arkansas, and all I want is some chickens, a garden, and a place to go fishing once in a while." What my father seeks is not a return of times that were worse for women and people of color. My father wants progress towards a society in which everyone can get by, including his white college-educated son, who graduated into the Great Recession and for 10 years sold his own plasma for gas money. After being laid off during the recession of 2008, my dad had to cash in his retirement to make ends meet and look for another job. He has labored nearly every day of his life and has no savings beyond Social Security. Oh, yes, my father is angry at someone, but it is not his coworker, Jem, a Filipino immigrant with whom he has split a room to pocket some of the per diem from their employer, or Francisco, a Hispanic crew member with whom he recently built a Wendy's in North Memphis. His anger is directed at his bosses who exploit labor and governments that punish the working poor, 2 sides of a capitalist democracy that bleeds people like him dry. Corporations, Dad said, that's it. That's the point of the sword that's killing us.
Corporations are people, my friend.
They've been doing this a long time. Among white workers, his negative energy has been manipulated to great political effect by a conservative trifecta of media, private interests, and celebrity that we might call Fox, Coke, and Trump. As my dad told me, quote, "There's jackasses on every level of the food chain, but those jackasses are the ones that play all the other jackasses." Still, millions of white working class people have refused to be played. They've resisted the traps of racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and nationalism and voted the other way. Or in too many cases, they didn't vote at all. I am far less interested in calls for empathy towards struggling white Americans who spout or abide hatred than I am in tapping into the political power of those who don't. Like many Midwestern workers I know, my dad has more in common ideologically with New York's Democratic Socialist congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez than with white Republicans who run that state. Having spent most of his life doing dangerous, underpaid work without health insurance, he supports the idea of single payer. He supports universal basic income. Much has been made of the white working class's political shift to the right, But Mr. Trump won among white college graduates, too. According to those same exit polls trotted out to blame the undereducated, 49% of whites with degrees picked Mr. Trump. 45% picked Hillary Clinton. Among them, support for Mr. Trump was stronger among men. Such Americans hardly vote against their own best interest. Media coverage suggests that economically distressed whiteness elected Mr. Trump when in fact it was just plain whiteness. Stories dispelling the persistent notion that bigotry is the sole province of undereducated people in derided flyover states are right before our eyes. But a white man caught on camera assaulting a black man at a white supremacist rally last August in Charlottesville was recently identified as a California engineer. This year, a white male lawyer berated restaurant workers for speaking Spanish in New York City. A white female, Stanford-educated chemical engineer, was the one who called the Oakland, California police on a family for barbecuing while black. Among the 30 states tidily declared red after the 2016 election, in 2/3 of them, Mrs. Clinton received 35 to 48% of the vote. My white working class family was part of that large minority, rendered invisible by the Electoral College and graphics that paint each state as red or blue. Forces more influential than the political leanings of a white factory worker decide election outcomes. Gerrymandering, super PACs, corrupt officials. In Kansas, Secretary of State Chris Kobach blocked 30,000 would-be voters from casting ballots and was recently held in contempt of federal court for doing so. As an aside, let me add that currently at this moment, Chris Kobach is in charge of counting his own votes. She goes on, some of my political views shifted when my location, peer group, and news sources changed during my college years. Many Americans today have a glut of information, but poor media literacy. Hard to rectify if you work on your feet all day, don't own a computer, and don't get a chance to learn the vocabulary of national discourse. Today, populism is often used interchangeably with far right, but the American left is also experiencing a populist boom. According to the national director, Democratic Socialists of America nearly quadrupled in size from 2016 to 17. It saw its biggest one-day boost the day after Miss Ocasio-Cortez's recent primary upset. Progressive congressional candidates with working-class backgrounds and platforms have major support heading into the midterms here in Kansas, including the white civil rights attorney James Thompson, who grew up in poverty, and Sharice Davids, a Native American lawyer who would be the first open lesbian representative from Kansas. To find a more accurate vision of these United States, we must resist pat narratives about any group, including the working class, on whom our current political situation is often most pinned. The greatest con of 2016 was not persuading a white laborer to vote for a nasty billionaire with soft hands. Rather, it was persuading a watchdog press to cast every working class American in the same mold. The resulting national conversation, which seeks to rename my home Trump country, elevates a white supremacist agenda by undermining resistance and solidarity where it is most urgent and brave. That said, okay, reading you that particular op-ed piece, there is an article. It's in today's homework. There are fabulous articles in today's homework. Just go to randyrhodes.com, click on homework, or randyrhodes.com/homework. Sign up for the homework. You'll get these things. This is the most amazing article I have come across. What this one is called, it's in the homework, it's Want White Working Class Voters to Support Democrats? Strengthen Unions. And it is a long article. You need to print this out and take it to the party. You know, you really do. It is the most amazing article that tracks the decimation of unions, union membership with right-wing Republican governors and right-wing legislatures, and how wages declined since wiping out unions.
Clear.
Tell me is it right now to give it to the night? Pray for me, pray for me. Oh! I love that.
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
Oh, so before I forget, the sneakers, men's sneakers, they're black men's sneakers. They are on sale right now at randirhodes.com. There are very few pairs. They're in sizes 8 to 11. And you can order them now, and it'll be first come, first serve. And if we get people that really want them, we'll make more. But right now, I think there's 16 pair, 4 in each size 8, 9, 10, and 11. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. The other thing is we're going to do Randi Rhodes hats. They're already done. They probably will go on sale tomorrow in the Randi Rhodes store. So you just go to randirhodes.com, and in the top right-hand corner, there's a white oval. It says merch. That's what you click on. Okay. That done. Let's talk about us. I really wanted to talk about us today. There is a primary, like I said, in Wisconsin, Vermont, Connecticut, and Michigan. All right. That said, there are 217 million Americans who are 25 years and older. This is according to the Census Bureau. Of those 217 million Americans 25 and older, 120 million, like me, do not have a college degree. That is the proxy by which you describe the white working class. And that is not a monolith. And that is the mistake that I and others have been making all along. Non-Hispanic white people represent nearly 60% or 72 million of the nation's working class, and Democrats ignore them at their peril. We are not organized any longer by unions. The declining power, which was the source of our power in my lifetime, labor unions, who used to mobilize us voters, the white working class voters, the 120 million Americans who lack college degrees, like me, who would organize and educate these voters in the policies of progressive candidates, is decimated. However, corporate unions, if you will, if you must, if you may call them something, they are ever present. They are called the National Association of Manufacturers. They are called American Communications Workers. They are, no, sorry, not workers. They are called the National Rifle Association. They lobby on behalf of gun manufacturers. They are called the Chamber of Commerce. They lobby on behalf of local businesses. You have all of these lobby shops. You've got insurance carriers lobbying. They're all organized. The only ones that aren't organized are the 120 million Americans who work every single day without a college degree. We used to be organized in something called unions. And once unions were busted up by things like right to work, by things like a card check, not being allowed, where you can't just check off that you want to be part of a union. I mean, you've had court cases that literally started outlawing the presence of unions, essentially, in violation of the National Labor Relations Act that was passed in this country in 1935. 1935, American workers finally fought hard enough to get the right to unionize. In 1935, when the National Labor Relations Act passed, giving workers like me the right to unionize, we saw a huge upsurge, not just in union organizing during the Depression, not just in union organizing during World War II, but we also saw tens of millions of workers make it into the middle class. The poorest Americans were now in unions. And they started getting paid real wages. unions flourished. The labor movement became the major engine of the Democratic Party's turnout. Unions educated members and members' families about which candidates supported their issues. They recruited their members to volunteer for campaigns. They mobilized their members to vote. They got other working Americans to the polls. Even today, union members are more likely to participate in election campaigns. They are more likely to vote. They are more likely to vote Democratic than Americans who are not in unions. Lobby shops for the business side of things began to sprout up in 1947. And they persuaded Republican Congress members to pass the first anti-union bill, the Taft-Hartley Act. That passed over the veto of President Harry Truman, who described it as he vetoed this outlawing, this partial outlawing of unionization. He wrote that it was a clear threat to the successful working of our democratic society. The unions said that the Taft-Hartley Act, which was sponsored and passed by the Republican Congress, was a slave labor bill. Why? It restricted workers' rights to strike. It restricted workers' rights to picket. It restricted workers' rights to boycott. This was the beginning of the right to work laws that allowed workers to enjoy all the benefits of unionized workplaces without paying any dues. It has been used over the last 50 years, especially the last 20, to strangle unions that organize drives to reduce union membership, to diminish unions' political clout, because if you can't collect dues, you can't contribute to campaigns. Meanwhile, we have Citizens United on the other side. And Citizens United allows dark money, at least the union money. You know that it's coming from, the machinists, or you know it's coming from steel workers, or you know it's coming from Teamsters, or you know it's coming from, service workers, right? But we don't know about the dark money that goes into these this corporate nightmare. Here's the cold hard fact. People who remember with longing a simpler, better time for the middle class typically are focused on years like 1954. That's when union membership in this country peaked. Can you believe this? It peaked in 1954. We had a very strong middle class. Sure, we didn't have racial equality. We didn't have a lot of the things that we have now. That is a separate conversation about race. But what we did have was a middle class, a healthy, strong middle class whose children expected that they would do better than their parents, and they did. And they had all kinds of middle class wages. You had decent work weeks. You had vacation. You had pensions. You had all this stuff. You know what union membership is? It was 34.5%, or 34.8, almost 35% in this country. Almost 35% of all working class people, and I'm talking about people without college degrees, belonged to a union and enjoyed middle class wages and benefits and health care and pensions and holidays and paid vacation and all those things. You know what union membership is now? 11%. And you know who most people who are in unions, you know where they work? Government. Public employees have become the last salvation of organized labor. And that is why the Supreme Court was asked to hear a case about public employees unions, and they punted, but that was the Janus decision. And they found for Mr. Janus, who is one of these people who was a right-to-work guy who has been programmed since 1947 to want to work in a union shop but not pay his union dues. That's the Janus decision. But almost half of all the union members left in this country are government employees. Only 6.5% of private sector workers belong to a union. 6%. And this affects the outcome of elections because nobody is educating these workers on the issues they care about. No one is telling them what happened to health care and pensions. No one is telling them what right to work really means. Nobody is telling them about why it pays to pay your dues to the union, why it gets you better representation, why organized labor has no seat at the table anymore, why everybody is on their own now, and they are facing these organized corporate associations, lobby shops every day. They're on Capitol Hill and you're not. You're not there. And so what you have is workers trying to figure it out, and they divide between their economic interests and other concerns. And where do they get organized now? At the pulpit. 80% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump, even though if they had been union members, would not have voted for Donald Trump. That is a hard, cold fact. In a nutshell, that is what has happened to working class people in this country of all stripes. And that particular op-ed by this wonderful woman in Kansas who writes about her father working beside various people of differing ethnicities, not giving a damn about their differing ethnicities, but giving a damn about the boss's perch in the elite, his ability to exploit him and workers. That is the message. Buy a stinking podcast. Go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.